quick, so I'm sorry about that. So my name is Ken Kuebler. I'm Deputy Chief of Police from Columbus, Ohio. With us in the audience is Assistant Chief Jeff Happ, who oversees the Division of Fire, EMS, and Training Services. Lieutenant Matt Parrish from Columbus Fire, Lieutenant Dennis Jeffrey from Columbus Police, and Will Burton from Maryhaven. Will is the smartest man on the dais, and probably in the room. You can tell because of that bow tie, of course. Signals sort of the smartest guy here. So we're not here to talk about the path that took us to this national opioid crisis. There's a lot of blame to go around as far as how we got to this point. There's lots of finger pointing. Obviously, there's lawsuits out there and such. We're not here to talk about that underlying causes. We're going to tell you about how Columbus, Ohio, Public Safety, partnering with Behavioral Health and Addiction Services, refined our processes from 2012, 2015, to 2018 over time to respond to this crisis at its most base level. So as we were dealing with opiate addicts in the streets, we needed better solutions as to how to handle that. And so we'll let the politicians and other folks deal with exactly how we got here, but we had to figure out a way how to get through that. So ultimately, you're going to learn about how Columbus Police and Fire, along with our addiction and behavioral health service partners in Central Ohio, moved towards the opening of a first of its kind 55-bed addiction stabilization center that's dedicated solely to public safety admissions, right? So instead of you going there on your own, it's a place for public safety to take those folks. So if anything binds us together in public safety is, of course, the use of acronyms. We are at the IACP conference after all, so these might be helpful to you as we go through this. We'll try not to use the acronyms, but if we do, this will kind of help clue you in. So CPD is Columbus Division of Police, and CFD, Columbus Division of Fire. Yes, that doesn't make sense. What is CPD, Division of Police? That's what works. So the Rapid Response Emergency Addiction and Crisis Team, we call REACT. The Maryhaven Addiction Stabilization Center, we call the MASC. Addicts is the local funding board for alcohol, drug, and mental health services. Of course, CIT, most folks should be aware of the Crisis Intervention Team. Narcan is the brand name of the naloxone opiate overdose reversal drug. So we want to start with introducing you to a young man named David. David is a client of the MASC. It's too early, I think, to say David is a success from a long-term sobriety perspective. It's only been open since January, the MASC has. But he's a success to us in that he has embraced what the MASC is about. He is pursuing that sobriety. He has made himself available by video to kind of tell his story. We'll introduce him, we'll go back to him later today, but I think it's important that you hear from David in his own words, and we'll also just kind of introduce the REACT program where we're going.
The Columbus Fire REACT team here with David Witt. We're talking about what led you to that last overdose.
So I started using heroin around 2010. Waking up, trying to figure out how I'm going to get high, or how I'm going to get money, what I'm going to steal, if I'm going to go to the stores and steal, or if I'm going to lay around sick and maybe somebody else will help me get well. You know, them are all a sad existence.
We aren't able to go out there and arrest our way to solve the problem. We are the stopgap. Before this program started, how many of our officers were standing there watching people in an overdose state and dying?
(194) Narcan's been deployed. Hey, bud. Hey, bud. That should be the medics, and then also another officer should be. Did you snort heroin or shoot heroin or anything like that?
I snorted it.
You snorted it?
Our job is to reach out to people and give somebody the opportunity to get to tomorrow, or maybe tomorrow is the day that they will decide recovery is for them.
We're going to be transporting one over to the Maryhaven Addiction Stabilization Center.
presentation format this morning will be kind of, I guess, a moderated panel, essentially, if you will. Let me introduce the gentleman with their bios real quick. Lieutenant Matt Parrish joined the Columbus Division of Fire in July of '92. Over his career, he has served as a paramedic, EMS supervisor, CIT officer, hazmat officer, and in-charge rescue technician. Lieutenant Parrish currently serves as the supervisor of the REACT team and supervises the newly formed social services referral team. His many years of field experience bring a new perspective in managing and increasing the increased volume of EMS patients who call regarding issues related to behavioral health, substance abuse, and aging, as well as patients who are identified as high utilizers of the EMS system. Lieutenant Dennis Jeffrey from Columbus Police has been with the division since May of 1995. And during the past 17 years, Lieutenant Jeffrey has served in supervisory roles in patrol, training, and investigations. He's been a crisis intervention team member since March of '04 and became the CIT coordinator for Columbus in 2014. Lieutenant Jeffrey is currently assigned as the Mental Health and Addiction Services Lieutenant and also oversees the division's naloxone program. Lieutenant Jeffrey is retired from the United States Army Reserve. He earned a bachelor's degree in political science from Ohio State in 1993 and a master's degree in business administration from Franklin University in 2005. Lieutenant Jeffrey has completed the Police Executive Leadership College and the Certified Law Enforcement Executive course, both sponsored by the Ohio Association of Chiefs of Police. And finally, Will Burton currently serves as the Manager of Outcomes and Community Engagement at Maryhaven Addiction Stabilization Center, and in this role, he tracks admissions and outcomes data and is responsible for providing reports to stakeholders. He maintains a presence in the community through naloxone trainings. He serves on several committees and overseeing the clinical placement and experience of local nursing students. Williams serves as an adjunct faculty member in Capital University's nursing department, where he lectures on addiction and stigma, as well as providing clinical instruction for the psychiatric nursing course. Previously, he worked as a charge nurse on the detox unit of Maryhaven's main campus, and before coming to Maryhaven, William worked as a school nurse at Shanghai American School in Shanghai, China. He enjoys traveling, crossword puzzles, and collegial sports. I just wanted to just read those to you because I think it's important to understand who they are, what their experience is, where they're coming from. So as we move through the presentation, you understand why their experience matters and how they got us to this point. So, Matt, if you would, tell us a bit about Columbus generally and about the Columbus Division of Fire.
Columbus, Ohio is the 14th largest city in the United States. We cover roughly 225 square miles. We have 825,000 residents. We have over 1,500 firefighters who are also trained as EMTs or paramedics. Our firefighters work a 3-platoon system where they have 24 hours on and 48 hours off. In 2017, we responded to over 170,000 EMS calls. The city is broken down by 7 battalions geographically, and each of those battalions is covered with an EMS supervisor, and citywide we have 39 transport medics that are all ALS equipped. So we operate a single-tiered response, meaning that basically every truck that responds to an EMS call has at least a minimum of 1 paramedic on it, and they can handle any ALS emergency. So
this slide's going to kind of carry through as we talk about this process. So in Columbus, we wanted to look at what kind of data did we have. We analyzed that data. What does it teach us? The data leads to knowledge. Once we have that knowledge, what's our responsibility as public safety leaders in Central Ohio? What action steps should we take? So this movement from data, knowledge, action will be important as we further our discussion. So Matt, walk us through how better access and use of data help Columbus Fire make decisions.
So it's kind of odd, but data is relatively new in the EMS world. It wasn't until 2008 until we transitioned from paper reports to electronic patient care reports, or we call them EPCR, so there's another acronym to remember. So we had a lot of data, but we weren't analyzing it. We didn't have a way. Everything was done on paper. The reports got filed. They got reviewed, but we weren't collectively looking at the data. And all that began in 2008 when we switched to the electronic patient care reporting. But it still took us a while to figure out what to do with that data. In the past, we had a lot of CAD data, which I'm sure you guys do as well, but that just told us how many times we were doing things and how fast we were doing it. It didn't tell us really how well we were doing things. So as we started to analyze or collect the data, it really took us to figure out, okay, what are we going to do with this? And that change came for us in 2014. Assistant Chief Jim Davis was assigned to the EMS Bureau, and he brought a medical background, being a clinical care, critical care nurse, And we started to look at our EMS data more like the hospitals did as far as outcomes and how it could drive our response or how it would change our response. So that was a big change for us, just how we were analyzing and looking at our data. One of the big advantages of the electronic patient care reports, it was very customizable. So if you're doing paper and you print out a form, to change that form or ask a different question, you have to go and print out new forms, get rid of the old ones. But with the electronic versions, we could add or supplement it with different questions that were current to the problem we were dealing with. So this was very beneficial when we came to the opioid problem. We were able to add questions and really track specifics to it.
So tell us just a little bit the scope of the overdose challenge here in Columbus.
So again, one of our earliest challenges was getting consistent data. So even though we had electronic patient care reports, they still had, the authors or the medics still had the ability to document things differently. So what I might call an overdose, somebody else might call poisoning or substance abuse. So we figured if we were going to track it, we had to make it a clickable button. So there was limit our options so we could really see what we were dealing with. So that was one of the first challenges, and it took us a while to identify what items we wanted to track. So I'd say by 2010 is when we really had refined our electronic patient care reports and were able to start to see it. And what that showed us was from 2010 to 2017, you could see our overdose incidents had almost doubled. But what was more concerning was the amount of Narcan or the naloxone we were using each time to reverse the overdose. So that led us to the belief that there's a change in the drug that's on the street. The potency was stronger, and it really started to show us the benefits of tracking this electronically.
So there's a couple more statistics on how it impacted Columbus real quick. You can see the costs going up, and as Matt mentioned, the collection of some of the information got better there in 2010-12, up to about almost $180,000 in 2017. That's just the cost of naloxone, Narcan in Columbus. Total costs approaching $2 million in 2017 for EMS care. That's the products and services that they use when they respond to an opiate overdose. So as you recognize this increase in deployments happened in 2015, what changes did you make right away to start responding to the epidemic?
So by 2015, we're still operating under the impression that this is a public health emergency, not necessarily a first or a public safety response to this problem. But we were able to start to look at some data and collect data. And one of the first things we did is we started adding questions to the patient care reports on any suspected overdose. And one of the ones we wanted to measure was how many times law enforcement was on scene prior to EMS arrival. And we'll get back to that. But we also started looking at community partners because, again, we didn't think this was a public safety problem. This was a public health problem. So we reached out to the hospitals and we reached out to the health department and asked for their data. Again, this was a whole new approach to us. We had our data and we wanted to confirm it with public health and the hospitals to see what they were seeing. And that led to just confirming just what the scope of our problem was. We were able to see that there were several individuals in the community that had overdosed multiple times through the patient care reports. And we didn't think it was our problem to fix the addiction problem. We were working for the preservation of life, getting Narcan to them, getting them to the hospital, and then handing them off to the hospitals as this was their problem. So one of our first attempts to try to reach people or get people connected with treatment is Dr. David Kessick, who was our medical director, and Dr. Teresa Long, who was the health commissioner for the city of Columbus. They drafted a letter, and we would mail that letter out to any individual who had suffered multiple overdoses. We didn't get a very good response. We got one person that responded back and said basically they were interested in help, and this was dozens of letters that were sent out. And one call I specifically took in my office was a lady who called and cussed me out for accusing her of being an addict.
And so some other challenges, of course, you can imagine with the letter action step that was taken. Of course, we had the address where they were at the time of the incident. It's not necessarily the same address where they reside, and a lot of the patients would move around quite a bit. So this was a good first step. This was a good first attempt by Columbus Fire to try to have an impact, but did not quite have all the success that they had hoped. But in 2016, Dennis, after Columbus Fire brings it to our attention that, hey, you guys are arriving on scene often before fire is, what do we do with that information?
So we realized, obviously, that we were both responding on these same runs, as the video showed that a lot of times officers were just kind of standing by, almost helpless, waiting for fire. And obviously, we're out on the streets anyway, and Columbus Fire has to be dispatched, so our officers were there almost immediately with a lot of these. So with the coordination with City Councilman Rich Brown, Columbus Fire, we decided why not launch a pilot to see, if we were to give officers a tool, Narcan, to go to these runs, would it be effective? Could we save lives? Which was really why we're here. And I think that was the major first step, that we just had to kind of look at two different entities, fire and police, and realize we could combine to make a really good response. So that was kind of the initial impetus in the whole pilot.
Yeah, so the CPD mission statement is, we are in service with the purpose to protect, passion to persevere, and the utmost pride in our performance. And that purpose to protect piece is really what kind of drove us to partner with Fire on this idea. So how can we protect life? How can we bring our services to help protect life? Dennis, to talk about the pilot a little bit, as far as some of the data about it and the precincts that were selected and chosen to get started.
Sure. Well, you see here in red, obviously these are zip codes, but also they coordinate with precincts in our city, 19 and 13 precincts. So we saw, obviously fire was going to these same areas in red, so we knew those were key areas that we're having a lot of not only overdose calls, but also just drug-related calls for service. So that was what we decided to become the target areas. So basically, with the help of fire, we did an initial training where we trained about 20 officers with Narcan, and then those officers went out to train the other members of those precincts. One of the big parts of this, obviously, was we had to change a little bit of our culture. And there was a little bit of fear, obviously, that am I going to be in trouble if I do or don't use Narcan? So we were fortunate that in October 2015, the Ohio legislature enacted legislation that shielded officers from liability for administration of naloxone. And also with that legislation, provided citizens, if they were to call in, some liability themselves. So there wasn't this fear, if I call the police or fire, am I going to get charged? So that kind of opened up the door for citizens not only to call, but also for our officers to feel that they could do this without liability. So that was a huge step, obviously, to get the officers more on board. So, little things like how are we going to carry this? And when you start a new program, obviously, as many of you know, you have to start from scratch. So how do we carry naloxone? Well, it's obviously fragile, so we had to think about Pelican cases. So our officers carried a small yellow Pelican case to protect the drug. Some other, we decided on how, you've seen a different naloxone. There's some like a nasal spray, like a one shot. We opted on a mucosal atomizer device, which is one that you have to assemble. And the reason we did that, with coordination with fire, is we know there's a shelf life for naloxone. So it was a cost saver that we can now exchange that with Columbus Fire as they near expiration. So it made sense. We don't want to waste this drug and the money. And for some issues that came up, obviously, well, obviously the officers, will they be required to administer it? We decided that, no, you will be trained and you'll be supplied with naloxone. It'll be up to the individual officer to decide to administer or not. There's all kinds of factors, safety factors. Can you feel safe administering it? Another issue was handcuffing. There's some data out there that says, these folks, when you administer naloxone, they may become violent when they come to. So, we had to address that. Do you handcuff or not? That was also an optional thing we give the officers. Transports. Can we mandate, once naloxone is used, can we force people to treatment? Obviously we couldn't, so that was something we talked about. Lastly, criminal charges. If you're going to a scene and there's paraphernalia, will you charge for that? And once again, we provide a lot of discretion to the officers for that, and also the legislation dealt with that as well, providing that immunity.
Yeah, just real quick, that heat map, that came from Assistant Chief Jim Davis, he helped and Matt, they helped put this together for us to identify exactly where fire was administering naloxone. That represented about 2,500 administrations, I believe, in 2015, and those two precincts account for 25% of that total. So it was a very compressed area, which really kind of helped drive our pilot. So just want to chat a little bit again about the culture shift. Real quickly, how many folks from police are doing Narcan in their agencies, who carry Narcan? And if you don't mind showing who's not doing it. Okay, so we have a couple in the back. I would say our experience was it was easier than we, I think, imagined. So certainly the technical part of it, buying cases and figuring out how to exchange it before it expired and such, that was actually fairly, we're pretty good at figuring out numbers and processes. The big issue, of course, is a culture issue, and it's getting over that culture hump of police are going to do EMS's job now, or we're going to be helping folks who are breaking the law. We get that. We had a fair amount of pushback from a number of officers who said, I don't like anything to do with this, I'm not going to do this, you can't make me do this. I kind of call it roll call bravado a little bit. A lot of folks will say, no, I'm not going to help somebody in front of their peers. We believe that if we gave you the tools and resources to save a life, that when push comes to shove, you look at that person, and you can save that person's life. Our officers step up to that challenge, and they absolutely did. We had, within 4 hours of the first training, we had our first usage. We have officers, Officer Ed Chung, you see him here, who has over 3 dozen administrations in the last 2 years. We give our officers rescue ropes, we give our officers AEDs, we give our officers tourniquets. We don't require you to use those things. We give you the tools to be a hero today as if you decide to be that hero. And what we found in Columbus is that they step up that challenge every time. So 2015, we responded to 2,800 overdose calls, 11,000 drug-related calls to service citywide. So I would just say that the culture thing sounds difficult. Your officers want to help people and save people, and I think they'll step up to it when actually given the opportunity. Real quickly, that's our numbers from the division. So we had the 56 or 57 in 2016 during the pilot. We began rolling it out citywide in 2017. We had 300 deployments in 2017. In 2018, year-to-date September, we had 350, so we'll probably be over 500 in 2018. In that introductory video, the video showed an actual naloxone administration, that was Ed Chung, the officer I spoke about there just a second ago. So Matt, by late 2016, CPD's rescuing patients with Narcan. What's FIRE's next step?
So we'd opened this door to data because of the opiate epidemic, and what it started to show us, the data from the pre-arrival of law enforcement before EMS was greater than 60%. But what it also showed us was, at a far greater number, we were responding to the same calls, and a lot of those calls were, involved mental health and the substance abuse. And a lot of times, we had a different approach to how we were going to handle these calls. We weren't talking the same terminology. We were looking at each other to say, this is your problem, no, this is your problem, how are we going to handle this? So as the opiate epidemic continued, I kept running into this guy at different meetings. And it was with the different mental health providers, and he kept talking about this program called CIT. And I looked at him one day and I said, can we get in that? Can you get some of my supervisors into this class? So we agreed that we were going to start sending our supervisors to the CIT class. Year to date, or since the beginning in 2016, we've trained over 40 of our EMS supervisors. What it really did was allow us to understand everybody's capabilities and limitations. So when we're telling the officer to put this person under arrest, they need to go to the hospital, there is no such thing as medical arrest. We learned that. But we also learned that they had a mechanism called pink slipping, or having somebody probated. So it really put us on the same common ground on what was the best interest for these patients. You know, in recent trends right now are the use of ketamine. That's a big topic in law enforcement. That's a drug we carry, EMS carries, that we can chemically sedate somebody. But there has to be a medical reason involved, where officers might be saying, can you just ketamine them? But if there's no medical indication, we have to follow our medical protocols. So CIT was a valuable tool in getting everybody on the same page, just because of the data showed we were on the scenes on just multiple types of incidents. And there was a lot of confusion on what was this, a medical emergency or a behavioral health emergency or a law enforcement emergency.
So that partnership, so we start doing some work that previously been EMS work, if you would, our camp deployments, and CFP starts attending CIT classes and those types of trainings. You start seeing that overlap of how drug addiction and behavioral health issues are overlapping, which drives us then to take that action step for EMS joining with our CIT. So Matt, in 2017, they just starts leading you to understand that what's happening with patients when they go to the ER is that they're eloping and then going right back into an overdose. Talk about that.
Yeah, I think earlier I talked about we're trying to solve this problem with an emergency response model. And our role in that model was preservation of life. And through 2016, we started to accomplish that. We'd equipped the CPD officers with naloxone. They were able to reverse the overdose. We were working on that step. And again, we reached out to the community stakeholders, the hospitals in particular, to find out what their data was showing. What they were telling us was that the patients would be dropped off at the hospital, and within 30 minutes, they would up and leave before they could ever be engaged with any type of treatment. So we started looking at the data and said, so what's the next step? We've got preservation of life is covered. How do we get these folks to treatment? So as we reached out to the community stakeholders, we were pushing this message that this is a community problem. We need a community response to it. You folks have to be involved. Just because we're 911 doesn't mean we're going to fix the problem. And we got a great response, but it was when you bring that public and private entities together, you got to figure out what everybody's role is, what their capabilities are. So one of our first actions was we collaborated with the hospitals and our ADAM-H board and some of the mental health providers and substance abuse providers, Southeast and Maryhaven in particular, and we wanted to work with them on getting folks linked with treatment. So our first stab at this was a pilot we did with them called the REACT team. We brought a social worker that had a background in mental health. They rode with a paramedic, and every time an overdose was transported to the hospital, our team would respond to the hospital and try to engage that person prior to them eloping from the ER. And we were very successful in the ones we were able to engage. We got over 50% of them linked with services, but those services were outpatient services. We didn't have a dedicated treatment facility at that time to take them to. So even them, the ones we were able to link, a lot of them wouldn't show up for their appointments. The other challenge we had was our team couldn't keep up. We have 5 major hospitals and a bunch of smaller hospitals in our area, and as the overdoses were occurring, we were bouncing from one side of the city to the other, so we were still missing out on quite a few of those folks to engage.
I think it's neat to see how you go from only one person accepted one of those letters in 2015 to 50% connections rate in 2017 when they send workers out and see directly to talk with people, right? Getting a letter is very easy to ignore and just toss aside. It's much harder to say no to somebody talking to you right now, saying I want to take you to help. So, Dennis, tell us about CPD's response to this overlap of mental health and addiction issues, and about our commitment to the One Line campaign as well.
So, as the Chief mentioned, in 2014, I became the CIT coordinator. Well, I was a patrol lieutenant, and I was doing that as well. And as we obviously have got involved in these other programs, it was becoming pretty problematic for me to handle those effectively. So, through the support of Chief Jacobs, Chief Kuebler, my position was made full-time. So it was a huge asset, I think, to the division and to the other community providers, because that enabled me to be a liaison, if you will, all the time to these folks, and just created. I think that's and I think the whole fact that the 3 of us are up here is pretty unique. If you think about policing, how it's evolved. Now I spend more time with social workers and firefighters than I do cops, so it's kind of an interesting dynamic. But I think that's really needed for these type of programs to flourish, because you really need that full-time commitment. So that was huge, I think, in really taking us over the top as far as coordination with different entities.
We realize that not every agency is going to have the resources, the ability to assign a full-time lieutenant to do this all the time. I do think it's important that you assign somebody who's responsible for it. So for many, many years, we had Dennis and some folks before him who did that overlapping with another job. But the issue got so severe in Columbus and so important to us in Columbus that we created that brand new position So in 2018, Matt, what next occurs to you? What are the next steps responding after the REACT program?
Again, the data from 2017, it showed that although we were being effective with the individuals we were able to engage through our hospital outreach efforts, we were still missing a large percentage. So the program, our REACT program, started to evolve. We ramped up the efforts with Southeast, who was providing the social worker, and they became a hospital-based response. So we let them cover the ERs. They didn't need our assistance anymore in the ER. We had showed them how to navigate their way through that and who the right people, the contacts were at the hospitals. So we let them cover the ERs with the overdoses. In our next focus, we had two challenges. One was treatment options, and then engaging the people that we did miss or that had overdosed and just flat out refused to go to the hospital. I think the data started to show that as the overdoses rose, our refusal rates, in the early beginning, it was around 3%. By this time, 20% of the people that had overdosed were refusing to go to the hospital at all. They were just so much more comfortable, and many of them had been reversed with Narcan multiple times. They knew what to expect. So they were less likely to go to the hospital. So we had to figure out a way to connect with those individuals. So again, I went back to Dennis and we started talking about doing some outreach with a CIT officer. And the REACT team evolved, and we partnered with Columbus Police, and we go out and do outreach. We get a CIT officer in plain clothes, fires in uniform, and we target the individuals that we missed at the hospital. We're still working with Southeast, and they're covering that end of it. And around the same time, through our outreach efforts with the community stakeholders, we know that the mask is coming along. It's going to be open. It got delayed a couple times, but in January it opened. So now we've got our outreach team in place, and we have a dedicated facility to take people to. If they're ready to go right now, we can take them right now, and we will always have a place to take them. But that opened our eyes to some other challenges. There's a lot involved for somebody to commit to treatment for 5 days, 14 days, 30 days. Some of the barriers that you just don't anticipate. You think about the scheduling we had to do to get to this trip for 5 days. Well, a lot of these folks have normal lives. They have responsibilities. They need help navigating that. So we embedded a social worker within the Columbus Fire Department to help overcome some of those barriers. One of the strangest cases, and I never would have thought of it until it happened, was a guy needed someone to watch his dog for 30 days. Where's police and fire going to find somebody to watch your dog for 30 days? But our social worker was able to find somebody who fostered that person's dog while he went to treatment. So those were just, the data showed that this is where we needed to move to, and all of this started to implement in the beginning of 2018.
Will, you've been patiently waiting for your opportunity to tell us about the mask and the good work you're doing there. So tell us about the paradigm shift and how we're moving towards the mask opening.
Sure, thanks, Chief. So real quick, I wanted to give a little bit of a background for Maryhaven. So we just celebrated our 65th anniversary, and we're a drug and alcohol rehabilitation center in Central Ohio. And much of our focus is within the city of Columbus. Initially, we started with alcohol detoxification, and then since have transitioned to a majority of opioid clients. When we were approached about being brought into the fold of this, it was explained to us the usual path of treatment, and it was a client would overdose in the field, it would be revived with naloxone, typically by EMS or CBD, and then they'd be transferred to the hospital or the ER, and then oftentimes, like Lieutenant Parrish said, they were eloping within 30 minutes. I actually had many EMS providers tell me that the client would elope before they could even finish their report in the hospital. So we knew that there was an issue there. They would go back into the community and then often overdose again. And part of that too, that overdose, that second overdose, is, as many of you probably know, with naloxone, the half-life of it is much shorter than whatever opioid the client is taking. So the client could conceivably overdose again without taking any additional drugs, and so that would result in another EMS run. So we knew that we had to try and change that path. If the client were to stay in the hospital, at best what we were looking at was possibly a handout of treatment options given to them by a social worker if there was a social worker on duty at that time in the ED. So we wanted to change the path, and we wanted to be able to provide a standalone facility where that was specifically designed for EMS to be able to transport clients to us after a naloxone deployment and revival. We also were working with other referring partners. Lieutenant Parrish had mentioned Southeast Mental Health. They still are our focal point through the hospitals and our funnel point. We've also worked with so both EMS and then the REACT team, as well as a local fire station, the Whitehall Fire Station, that just rolled out a Safe Station program. So those are the partners that we ended up working with, but the focus was on EMS and having a place for them to bring the client to directly engage in treatment, not just get medically stabilized.
All right, so what is the center? Will, what resources does it have? Just describe the actual facility itself.
So it's a 55-bed facility, and when we were trying to figure out where the location for the facility should be, we took a look at a place where we were already renting space for some of our outpatient programs, and that happened to be in the 43207 zip code, which you can see is the large zip code in red on the PowerPoint. So it happened to align perfectly, and it was right in the heart of where the largest percentage of overdoses and Narcan deployments were happening. So that's sort of where we ended up setting, and it was an old hospital and then urgent care. So the infrastructure was somewhat there. It still required a pretty big lift as far as renovations go, but at least the infrastructure was there. So we were able to create a 55-bed facility. So we have 5 beds down in triage. We can flex to 7 if need be, which we often are. And then on the 3rd floor, we have that where we have a unit on either end of the 3rd floor and a total of 50 beds up on the 3rd floor. The renovation to get it up and running, facilities-wise, was about $1.4 million. It was a combination of public and private funds.
Yeah, so we were kind of lucked out that we had a facility ready to, almost not ready to go, but certainly was, as Will mentioned, had the infrastructure for patient care. And as hospitals consolidate around the country, as hospitals get better at the business side of hospitaling, you're going to see more and more of these facilities come available. So if you are to go down this road, this one place you want to look is where's the medical facility that's closing that we might be able to repurpose for a program like this. So Will, if you describe the facility itself, talk about the employees.
Yeah, and real quick, Chief, also I would point out that the key is that we're able to provide 3 levels of care all within one facility, and I think that was really key too, that it wasn't just someone coming to a triage facility and then maybe staying for less than 23 hours and then getting shipped off to another facility. Once they arrive to us, we're able to engage in all 3 levels of treatment in one spot, so I think that was key also. We say a small to medium-sized nonprofit, and we're probably on that medium-sized cost, but I think we had just under 400 employees before we opened this facility, so this was a big lift for us to hire an additional 100 plus employees, and then that annual cost is about $6.6 million in terms of employee costs. It was an interdisciplinary approach, so we were able to find a medical director who was board certified in addiction medicine, which is not an easy thing to find, so that was key. She was also cutting edge in working with pregnant females battling substance use disorder in the community, which was also a key, so we are able to treat pregnant clients. Nurse practitioners are the primary drivers on our units, and all of them have their buprenorphine waivers, so they can all prescribe Suboxone, which is the primary drug that we use for withdrawal management and MAS. Counselors, obviously, nurses, patient care assistants, admission specialists, and then another new dynamic for us was we hired peer recovery supporters, which was a new position for Maryhaven. It's certified by the state of Ohio, and there's training that the peer recovery supporters go through, and they're former clients. And so the only requirement really is that you have lived experience either with addiction, battling addiction, or with mental health, and most of the time it's a combination of the 2. And so both of the ones that we have full-time, and we have another in the pipeline, they're Maryhaven alums, and so they went through our programs at main campus 5-6 years ago, and they've been integral in having that discussion with our clients that are on the fence about either staying or what type of treatment they really want to engage in. And then CPD, special duty security. One of the big concerns, and we'll touch on this a little bit in a few slides, was security issues that was presented by the citizens in the neighborhood. And so there was concern and the belief that people would just be, hanging out outside of a treatment facility. And that was something that I couldn't just tell them wouldn't be the case. We had to be able to show them for them to really believe that. But out of those early discussions, an agreement was reached with Columbus Police where a special duty officer would be assigned to work in our triage and admission department 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And Lieutenant Jeffrey is there at least twice a week for a couple of shifts. And so once again, it was another example of us working together side by side on the daily. And I think it's been a twofold success on that front too. It has allowed our staff to feel more comfortable and secure. And it's also allowed another opportunity for CPD to interact with our clients in a positive way and show them that they're encouraging the clients to receive treatment.
Well, this was a huge challenge to get the facility open this fast. You'll see here from April 17 to January 18, it's kind of, we went from idea phase to opening. Just kind of talk about the background, how we got through it that fast.
Yeah, and it really was a quick process. Lieutenant Parrish is talking about developing these teams and where are we going to be able to transport them. And so what we're hearing is, when are you going to be able to open? When are you going to be able to open? So there really was a sense of urgency. So in April, the idea was presented in April 2017 to our local ADA board. In July, they approved the funding, and then in August, we started making renovations. Originally, they thought we might be able to be open in November. There were some challenges that ended up happening, mostly around, there was an issue with the toilets in each room. And so we had to get that taken care of. So there's all these little different logistical things that you don't think about that they obviously all popped up. Finally in January, though, on January 19th, we were able to open our doors. And as another example of collaboration, interdisciplinary and interagency collaboration, EMS under the direction of former Assistant Chief Davis and Lieutenant Parrish came to the facility and they did dry runs with our staff. Because we are still a subacute facility. We're not first responders. Even though we're working with our clients often fresh off of an overdose, we still aren't out in the field. And so we don't have that training. So that was really helpful and integral as well for EMS to come in and do some dry runs with us and kind of paint a picture of what that client is going to look like when they do arrive to us.
This is something that Central Health I'm pretty proud about. And I've been in the business of government for 25 years now, and moving from idea to a facility being open in 8 months is a dramatic success story. We talk about those Pelican cases that we used to carry in naloxone. It took us 4 months to like 200 Pelican cases at work. And we got this facility open in 8 months. That's a pretty heavy lift. We'll have the community respond. What types of messaging and meetings do you need to have happen to get the facility open?
So this is one of the many things that I was tasked with. I was a pretty busy person here initially. So I tried to foster relationships with all of these groups, and most of them are continuing relationship that I'm still taking part in their committees and community meetings. Also, one of the other things that we were able to institute along with those dry runs with EMS, before I forget, was Chief Davis and I sat down and we were able to come up with some time periods where our staff could do ride-alongs with EMS. And that was really important too, because we needed to see what EMS was experiencing in the field. And so when they did bring that client to us, we had somewhat of a frame of reference of what they had already experienced. So I think that helped. And it's just another interagency example of collaboration. Really the most difficult groups that I had to get buy-in from were the village associations and the civic associations. So one of them in particular, I think they averaged about maybe 8 to 10 people that were showing up for their monthly meeting. When this was announced, I went to speak to them, and it was standing room only, and there was like 125 people. And they weren't exactly happy to see me. Well, actually, they were happy to see me because they could express their opinions that they had. So they weren't happy about the facility, very happy to see me. I wish I could have said that it was reciprocal, but that was part of what we had to do, right? And so we had to have these difficult conversations. We had to talk about addiction and stigma and treatment. And these were conversations that a lot of people don't like to have. Particularly, you know, we had a lot of fairly progressive people in the neighborhood who would tell you that they are pro-treatment and that they don't want people to be locked up and they want to get ahead of the problem. But all of a sudden, when there is a treatment facility that's going to go in their neighborhood, it becomes pretty real. And then the opinions start to change and shift a little bit. And so part of what we tried to do is engage with them, listen to them, hear their concerns, and then try and come up with different policies if it was, you know, complementary to what their concerns were. So I already cited the special duty CPD officer. That was a big one, and that really helped calm the fears of the citizens in the area. Another one was they were concerned about when our clients would sign themselves out AMA, which they can do at any point. Every client that is with us is there of their own free will. But they were concerned that the client would sign themselves out AMA or get discharged successfully and then walk right into their neighborhood. Okay? So we instituted a no walk-off policy. So we provide cab transport to an actual address, and most of the time that is not in the neighborhood or not in the area. So we do provide that, and that was another issue that was brought up by the local associations. It was also a delicate dance to try and explain to them also that, you know, we were setting up shop in the highest rate of overdoses in the community, so the clients were already there, right? It was already a part of that community, and we were trying to be right there in the heart of it to provide support and treatment.
Does anything else you want to say on safety? You use CIT options, right, for special duty?
Yes, sir. Yeah, that was so when the idea came out about having special duty there, we thought CIT officers would make the most sense. And I can say I do work there, and I've learned more working there than I have in any other facet, you know, attending lectures, because I see people coming in and I can talk to them, I can learn a lot. And I think a lot of our officers, we've kind of bridged that gap. Because obviously there's some distrust in law enforcement with this community, and I think it's been a huge way to build that trust and to have an officer. Our officers will sometimes talk to them when they're leaving, hey, you know, maybe you want to stay, and I think it's been a win-win for both the community and the Columbus Division of Police.
And that's a local term also. Special duty for us, that's extra duty or detail work if it's how it's talked about in your agency. It's not Columbus taxpayer money is going to that. That's money coming from the mass and its budget. So these next two slides are the flow charts that are in the IACP app. They will tell you, we're going to walk through how you actually get a patient from EMS to the mass, and how the mass actually processes the patient through their system. So Matt, tell us how fire gets from the mass.
Yeah, so everything we do in the medical community is protocol driven, and we use algorithms and flow charts, and this was no different. Like Will said earlier, it was a subacute facility. It wasn't an ER, and our folks are trained and used to taking patients to a higher level of care. That wasn't necessarily the case there. So our medical director met with the medical director from Maryhaven, and we developed a protocol that the patient or the client had to meet the minimum inclusion criteria, so that we weren't taking the wrong patient to that facility and then having to make a second call to pick them up and take them to the hospital because they had a complex medical condition that needed treatment. So we developed this protocol. Like Will said, we did some dry runs with it. We tested it. It was a whole new concept where a patient comes in on a stretcher by EMS and says, here's your patient, for his staff as much as it was for our folks transporting somebody to a treatment center. We also had in place as part of this, though, is if they didn't meet this criteria and went to the hospital and had expressed interest, we had that second safety net in place already at the hospital to get them there once they were medically stable.
So we'll talk about how the mass actually works, how patient flows through your services.
Yeah, and going back to that previous slide real quick also, one of the key things that we were able to institute that EMS provided with us provided for us was a radio. So we had a dedicated channel for our facility, and so that was another new thing for for us, you know, being able to understand that radio chatter. So that was an adjustment that we made, but it was a necessary adjustment, so that was helpful. And the protocol has evolved also, like, as Lieutenant Parrish said, you know, we've had to get together and work on it, so it has been a dynamic protocol that we've been able to institute. So this is a flow chart, and kind of gives you an idea. On the left-hand side would be our referral sources, and we keep this flow chart in our presentations, even though it's a little bit dated, because I think it's important for you to see the beginning of what our conception was. And so along the left-hand side, what I like to think of sort of our inputs or our referral sources, we have law enforcement and first responders, sort of as that first tier, and then the REACT team, which through Southeast for the hospitals, and then there's a couple more tiers below that. What we realized pretty quick is we weren't going to make it past the second tier there. So our census was creeping up pretty quickly just based on those first two. So we have not really gone beyond that. And I think that has been, that was an adjustment that we just had to wait and see sort of what the numbers were going to look like, and then move accordingly. After the client is referred to us, everyone comes into the admission and triage unit. And so that is on the first floor under the ambulance overhang, which to give you an idea of how old the facility is, you can't even take the ambulance under the overhang because they're too big, and so we don't want to take the top off of those, so they can't even come under the overhang. But they bring the client in, and we do a warm handoff, and right there it's our highest acuity. We're still defined as subacute, but it is a higher acuity client than we're used to working with. And again, the goal there, medical stabilization, we want to make sure that the client still wants treatment. Okay? And so one of the things that we found also is that after a client is revived with naloxone and brought to us, okay, they start to realize the enormity of the situation and what happened. So any of you that have been on a run, had deployed naloxone, you're seeing that whole situation take place, right? The client isn't seeing that, right? And they're not feeling that. They're just waking up and they're not really sure what happened. So oftentimes they would arrive at our facility, and they consented to arrive and to come to us, but they kind of realized, well, wait a second, I've got some stuff I really need to take care of. So like Lieutenant Parrish said, a lot of the clients realized, I'm not ready for this right now, which was okay. We didn't lose them in the system, okay? The goal there is to stay about 4 to 23 hours. Okay, we want to make sure that the client doesn't need to be sent out for any further medical care, and we would like to give them their first dose of Suboxone there. So we use a test dose. We start with about 2 milligrams, and then we titrate upward. So the idea is we don't want to throw the client into another precipitated withdrawal and make them sick. Okay? So we give them a test dose, and then we titrate upward. Hopefully we can give those 2 doses in triage and then move them up to detox on the 3rd floor. Detox, they're still getting stable and there's varying degrees of sickness. Another thing that we've seen as the potency of the drugs have increased is the amount of time that it's taking to get through that dope sickness, even with the use of Suboxone, has increased. And so where it used to be maybe within that first day or 2 of receiving Suboxone, the client was feeling better, we're seeing 3, 4, even sometimes 5 days for our clients that are exclusively using fentanyl. So that has been a change also. So we look at about 5 to 7 days on detox, and everything depends on the client. It's very client-centered in terms of the treatment plans that we develop. Most of our clients will be on either a taper, which would be about a 7-day taper if they don't want to remain on any Suboxone, or if they're interested in MAT or medically assisted treatment, we would try and hold them on what we consider a therapeutic or treatment dose until we can get them placed with a provider. The 3rd level is our residential, and we kind of think of that more as a non-medical residential, and we say about 2 weeks. That's the average stay. We've got some wiggle room. We can go up to 30 days if need be, and those are the clients that are typically wanting to then also transition to further recovery housing. So one of the challenges, and we'll touch on this a little bit later as well, one of the challenges with recovery housing in our area is most of them do not allow medically assisted treatment. Suboxone or methadone. So that is a challenge for us. And so those clients that are in residential, try and get them 2 to 4 weeks where they're not taking any narcotics or any buprenorphine, and then we transition them to the recovery housing. And then all along the right-hand side on the outputs, you can see like admission, detox, long-term residential, they're all linked to that because we're really looking to move the client to the appropriate level of care at any time. Some of our clients will discharge from admission and triage when we realize that we are able to link them right away, or they were already set up with care at a previous provider.
All right, I'm going to just kind of fast forward to this slide of outcomes. We are still collecting data. It's only been open since January. Certainly collecting a lot of information to help drive next steps and make some adjustments. Certainly that flow chart has, we've already had to make some adjustments on the left-hand side there where we thought maybe we'd be more folks bringing people to the mass. We kind of cut that back from the size perspective, but we'll continue to track what we learned from the center and continue to look at that data. We'll start bringing us to a close here with some of the challenges and opportunities that you recognize early on.
So one of the biggest issues is staffing, right? And this is across mental health, particularly addiction in general. And so being able to recruit enough staff, particularly within the nursing community, to be able to have the ratios that we wanted. Having 3 major hospitals in our area is great from a medical care perspective. Not so great when you're a small nonprofit trying to recruit nurses to come work for you. So that has been a challenge for us and something we're constantly continuing on trying to make better. We are only able to do opioid withdrawal plans because with the DEA we were not granted a license to have benzodiazepines on site. So we're not able to do anything that would be alcohol or a benzo withdrawal. So if a client does get to us, we have protocols in place to hopefully not have that client get to us, that they would be redirected to the ED. But if they do get to us, then we will try and get that client, transport them over to our main campus. But that has been a challenge as well. Adjusting to communicating with EMS, which I said, that was totally foreign to us. So learning how to use the radio. I know there's been many times when Lieutenant Jeffrey has been there and has wanted to say, you guys want me to step in on this here? But we've tried. We've made a lot of progress, that's for sure. And then I think working on a diversion policy. That was another thing that I learned is, in the treatment world, we like to be very nuanced. And so as our census was approaching diversion status, we would send out texts to all of our stakeholders saying, well, we're now able to offer this type of treatment, but not this type of treatment. And we really were trying to be nuanced. And I sat down with Lieutenant Parrish and he said, well, we need to have a black and white answer. So we can either transport to you and you can provide the services that you have, or we go on divert, but we need a more black and white. So that was really helpful to understand that as well. And then safe, stable housing continues to be a challenge as well.
And just some final lessons learned that acting their CPR.
So CPR is the mantra, I guess, or the overarching philosophy that we try to employ at MASC. And so I pitched this idea to our director, and he said, yeah, go ahead, write it. So CPR stands for compassion, patience, and respect. So we always talk about then practicing CPR with every client that walks in the door, but also practicing it with our staff as well, because we need the support from each other. So we always talk about practicing CPR. Being flexible with our readmissions. And so at main campus, we had a 60-day or 90-day readmission policy if somebody left. We realized that we had to change that. And so we don't have a hard and fast policy for readmission at MASC. And we realized that, as one of our peer supporters says, relapse does not have to be a part of recovery, but it often is. And we realized that our job is to plant seeds, and we never know when those seeds are going to take hold. And so I don't like to say that, oh, that person's not ready, but hopefully, I think of it sort of that the seeds were planted, but they just haven't quite taken hold yet. And we don't know when that's going to happen, so we had to be flexible with our readmission. The 3 of us sit down bi-weekly and we have a case review. And so Lieutenant Parrish brings his runs and talks about the ones that, you know, there was difficulty reported and maybe our messaging wasn't consistent. I try to give our side of the story, and then Lieutenant Jeffrey says, well, I was actually here for this one, and both sides are wrong, so let me tell you how it went down. So we do that bi-weekly, and that has also been very helpful, just continuing to, you know, evolve with our admissions process. And then I think EMS adjusting to the questions that we have when you bring a client to us, that was a change. So Lieutenant Parrish said, you know, they're used to taking someone to a higher level of care where they're dropping them off, giving a quick report, and then they're filling out their own report, and then they're going. You know, we wanted to make sure we had the right client being brought to us, and so we had a lot of questions, and that was something that was different. So there were some hurdles there that we had to work through, but it's been good on both sides.
So as we ready to hear from David again and hear what the mask has meant to him, just real quick down the line, how has the mask helped Columbus Fire? What's it mean to Columbus Fire?
So in the EMS world, this is a totally unique facility, basically a one-stop shop where you can drop somebody off and then they can remain and get inpatient treatment. There are some other facilities that have opened up that are just detox only or stabilization. But just to have that destination, in our world we take traumas to trauma centers, we take strokes to stroke centers. Why shouldn't we take people that are experiencing substance use disorder to a facility that specializes in that, where they can get the right care and the right conversations? So really for us it was just that there was a lot of frustration on the street from the folks that would see somebody they just took to the hospital, they left, they overdosed again, they took them back to the hospital, and you just feel like you're in that broken cycle. Well, now we had the right facility in place for our folks to take people to.
Dennis, how does it help CPD?
I think it's, you know, and we keep talking about, I hear officers all the time, that's not my job or that's not my function. I think we're kidding ourselves because we have to adapt with society and society's issues, and you know, we're the ones called immediately to these. So I think just adapting how we think about these and then having a facility and then collaboration just made it, you know, like you said, Chief, it's sometimes hard to get stuff done in our organizations, but I think this is a perfect example of how you can collaborate and get things done when people have the right message.
Billy, comments?
I think that, you know, it's enabled us to be able to provide treatment or same-day service for clients that are at their most fragile state. And so I think that's been the key with us. When someone decides that they're ready for treatment, we need to seize that opportunity right then, not say, okay, well, you're now on the wait list and we can call you back in 7 to 10 days, because the likelihood of them still being ready to engage at that point is not so great.
All right, let's go back to David real quick.
It's Rapid Response Emergency Addiction and Crisis Team. It was formulated to engage a person after they overdosed, before they had a chance to elope from the ER or change their mind about being transported to the emergency department.
We had a call here not too long ago, and we offer help for people in the community. So, you know, that's all I do. Okay?
I'll definitely tell him.
Sure, thank you so much. So good to meet you.
Nice meeting you.
All right.
It's the Witt family, and we're here, and they've agreed to just kind of talk to us. You're going to get the help you need. I think that's the best thing, okay? Make sure you're going to get the help you need, man. I love it with all my heart. All right, let's go home. It's a good man. Good man. You're ready to get the help. So.
All right.
All right. They're gonna take care of you in here. Just get through it, okay? And your family has my number, okay? All right. See you, bud.
When did the facility open?
So we opened on January 19th, 2018, and we've got 55 beds for adults, over 3 different levels of care. So we have 5 beds dedicated to admission and triage, about 20 beds dedicated to detox services, and then an additional 30 beds dedicated to non-medical residential. So I think another success that we've had has been the community rally around this project. You know, there was a lot of support going into the project, and after we opened, that support has remained really high.
I can't really count on my own, because I can think of plenty of times I've said, I'm just going to detox this week, I'm done. A lot of times doing that. I probably wouldn't even be sitting here right now, to be honest. I mean, the React team's what pushed me into it. Like I said, Cornell showed up, called, called again. So, yeah, I probably wouldn't even be sitting here right now. I'd probably either still be getting high or be dead, one or the other. It seems kind of weird to say because of, my family begging me to go, but then here's this fireman asking me.
Right. Total stranger.
But it seemed a little more serious to me.
There are nuggets of good news in all that. The opiate molecule's been around for over 1,000 years. It's been part of the human condition for a long time. It is certainly increasing in its danger to our society in the United States currently. But there are programs like this happening across the country, and these are saving thousands of lives. This partnership over 3 years, from expanding the lock zone to working with social workers, opening specialized facilities, is literally responsible for thousands of people in Columbus that are alive today that wouldn't be otherwise. So I'm proud of the work that they've done. We're proud of the collaboration in Columbus. We will continue to have to react to, not to use the acronym, but we'll have to react to changes on the ground. There will be new analogs that come along. There will be new things that come along that we'll have to react to. But we have the infrastructure in place from the partnerships in Columbus to attack whatever comes next. So we're open for any questions. If you have any questions about how we got to this point, any questions about how the facility operates, happy to take any of those from you at this time. Yes, sir.
No, I apologize. I walked out earlier, so I'm not sure about this. Where did you get the $6.6 million to start the program?
That's a good question. So it was a combination of public and private funds. We also received some federal and state grants. So we were part of the Cures Act, 21st Century Cures Act, so we received some money there as well. But we found that the local ADMH board, Franklin County ADMH board, ponied up a lot and really were integral in getting this launched. And then we were lucky enough to have some private donations as well.
It's amazing that it came together that fast. So we had the facility open, and we had that kind of money coming together that fast. But that kind of just reflects, we talk about the Columbus way in Columbus. It's a private public partnerships that get a lot of things done in Columbus. This is one example of that.
In addition to the opioid crisis, we're also seeing an increase in overdoses and use from things like cocaine, methamphetamines, and even K2 in that order. So is your facility equipped to adapt to those changes? How would you adapt? Can you talk a little bit more about these other things that are happening?
Yeah, so that polysubstance abuse issue or overdoses and other things is certainly a challenge. Well, thank
you for that question, because that is a question that we get asked a lot. Is this sustainable, right? We've crafted this facility sort of to focus on opioids. What happens when there's another wave of a different drug? The polysubstance is something that we see with almost every single one of our clients. And so we have seen an uptick in methamphetamine use, using concurrently with heroin, often shooting at the same time. And we're able to handle that. Same thing with cocaine. There's been a proliferation of fentanyl in other drugs in our area, and so we have seen a spike in overdoses from populations and pockets that traditionally weren't using opioids. We're able to respond to that as well. Right now, and we're in the process of getting our DEA licensure to be able to have benzodiazepines. Then we will be able to handle any type of addiction issue. And at our main campus, where I worked previously, we currently are able to do that. And so it doesn't, we're able to work with the client wherever they're at and with whatever that they're using. If that makes sense.
If I could answer some of that too, from the first responders perspective, is we've reached out and worked with so many community partners. We've started to open some other doors for treatment options. So if we come across somebody that's not opiate specific, we've built relationships. And we've also built this model that can adapt to whatever the next crisis is. And I think that's what's really key for us. We used it when we were looking at the Ebola crisis. You know, we were able to change our patient care reporting to identify those folks. And now if the next big drug epidemic is something different than opiates, we have those pieces in place to respond much more quickly than we did with this crisis.
Anybody else? Thank you. We're certainly available offline to answer any other questions. And if your community can move towards a project like this and needs some help, please feel free to reach out to us. Yes.